Okay, so one of the benefits of going this late in the day is that a lot of this stuff was covered earlier by my colleagues Annemie Wickmans and also by Marguerite, so I'll skip through some of these. But really I'm going to be talking about the Positive City Exchange project in Limerick, and in particular the open innovation, which is an aspect of that project. So the project is really, as Annemie introduced earlier, about creating a positive district, and it is a consortium of 2 lighthouse cities and 5 follower cities, a number of universities and business partners and NGOs. And really the project has 3 strands. One of them is about prototyping the future, so we have a digital model which will allow us to do some scenario testing, and we'll be creating a bold city vision, which is a sort of parallel to the standard statutory development plan process, using these digital tools but also our cooperation platforms and trying to integrate those things. The second is in enabling the future through putting in a community energy grid and creating a common energy market around that. But the one that I'm going to be concentrating on is the third strand, which is about accelerating the future. It's really about looking at a behavioral change, about setting up platforms to enable people themselves to move toward that transition of a positive energy city. And so really it's about moving from the place where we are now and how we transition toward that future of positive energy, using these various digital platforms, but also engaging with communities and doing that across both the buildings, but also our mobility platforms. And in Limerick, the district that we're focusing on is the historic Georgian area of the city. So it's one of the historic neighborhoods in the city center. It was built between 1770 and 1840 as a Georgian new town, and at the moment it has a lot of old buildings in it which are conserved, but it also has a high degree of dereliction and vacancy. So we purposefully planned this project in this area because it's really an area of great potential for the city. And in the context of the National Spatial Strategy, which is looking for us to put 50% of our new population growth in the existing historic built-up areas of the cities and the towns. It's an important area to get moving. And it's really focused around getting 5 buildings to work together as a positive energy block, and then expanding that out with 20 energy partners over the next years, so some buildings who are going to become champions and be able to accelerate that process, and then in the 3rd year moving it out to over 100 of those. So this shows, I won't go into all of these, the 11 demonstration projects, but the ones that I wanted to talk about today are the blue ones. So we have this bold city vision, and then a whole co-creation platform that we're setting up within this area, which will become a innovation playground and will contain a citizen observatory and an open innovation lab. So there's 5 reasons that we're doing this project: increasing the use of clean energy, also around jobs and creating more jobs in this climate energy area, particularly, as I said, around reducing vacancy and underuse of the historic city center. So we have derelict buildings, but we also have a lot of buildings where they're used on the ground floor, but not the upper floors, and where they would have historically been residential buildings are now primarily just commercial. We're also looking to increase the uptake of e-mobility, and importantly, this area of new smart community cooperation models. So we think there are a lot of solutions that will come at a cooperative level or a kind of groups of people working together, a neighborhood level. So this is a familiar diagram showing this built around this idea of the quadruple helix model, and even moving into the quintuple helix, so that you have that working group, which includes local authorities, academics, and SMEs, really centered around urban communities, kind of civic partners. And I suppose I always like to use this famous diagram by Sherry Arnstein about the ladder of citizen participation. So it really is about empowering citizens, moving up from just the idea of informing people or even just consulting with them into a sort of partnership process with them, where they have much more power in terms of influencing the way decisions are made, both in terms of policy that the local authority might be doing, but also in terms of the projects. And this is a diagram showing which is about universal design or people-centric design, moving from that kind of linear process where designers look at abstract guidance, come up with a concept, do a detailed design before they even start to consult with communities. Often that results in a lot of conflict because the process is really a kind of broadcast process where people are told what's happening. They're allowed to write back in a report about what's not working. And then usually what happens is we write back and tell them why what they're saying is maybe not 100%, very little change in the design, into moving into a kind of more iterative process which involves maybe going out at the very earliest stage in terms of engaging with people, the design concept being influenced by that engagement, and then involves, importantly, a kind of pilot or mock-up kind of stage, which then gets assessed, and sometimes through sensors and monitoring, and then that impacts into the design, and then that happens again. So the idea is that that kind of happens and is built up incrementally over time. And it also really draws upon this concept of living labs. So we're working with a number of pre-existing living labs in Limerick, hosted by the university, a health hub, an existing fab lab, and also the adaptive governance lab, where we again use this design process, and we have at the center of it people who act as sort of network weavers for these various quadruple helix partners, but also local community groups, and then communities of interest who might have particular areas of interest, and then innovators, and then professionals. So this idea of building up these brigades of volunteers that work with you, and also coming up with new types of kind of professional models where we give advice to community groups. So we've set up this citizen observatory in Limerick where this is really a place where these co-design platforms can happen. And really the idea is to allow groups themselves to self-organize. So setting up this place that people can have access to, but also these various processes which become defined and become something that people can run on their own. And so that citizen observatory also has a digital model of the city that people can access, but also a digitally printed model, so a kind of hardware and software element of that. It's really focused around this idea of setting up a calendar of city engaged weeks. So we've had our first one of those in September, and we'll have 6 of those over the next 3 years. And the idea of them is that they really have a lot of events that happen during that week, and a diversity of events that happen at different times, so that lots of different people can engage in them. Everything from mapping events to auditing events to co-design workshops to hacking days and maker days, and to children's workshops. So these will happen every 6 months, and we've also tried to plan those around pre-existing festivals. So the idea is that we would become part of the activities that happen during other festivals that are already scheduled for the city. So the past one we had in September culminated in Culture Night, and then we have a second one that will be happening in May, culminating in the Riverfest in Limerick. So the one that we had in September was themed around the idea of the laneways of the city. So there are laneways in the middle of the block. So Limerick has a grid structure, and it has laneways in the middle, which we think will be crucial pieces of infrastructure to allow people to cooperate in terms of providing community hubs or providing infrastructure to support cooperation. So during the week, we had mapping of the laneways and auditing projects. We had a co-creation board game. We had narrative tours of Georgian Limerick. We had a citizen sensing lab. And we had the launch of our SBIR project, and we had a creative play day. So this shows you what a community mapping and auditing workshop looks like. We use both digital technology, but also just plain old maps and drawings. So you can see here large, different scaled maps of the city that people can begin to identify places, but also kind of surveys that are done both on iPads, but also just as plain old surveys. So this one is an interesting one because what we did here is we engaged with a number of different groups, including a disability access group, a local environmental group, the Georgian Society. They each go out and with their own surveys, which really usually have to do with achieving a sort of a quality mark for the city. So for instance, accessibility is a quality mark, There's a safety quality mark for neighborhoods, which is called the Purple Flag. And so they can do their own auditing, and then importantly, they come back together to map and geolocate their issues on a map that they can then begin to see the diversity of needs in that area and begin to see where there are just patterns that emerge or where they might begin to work with each other. And these kind of activities allow them also to kind of meet each other. So we also organized some narrative tours of George and Limerick. It's early days now, so we don't have a lot of projects that are completely done up in terms of their energy, but we have a couple of them where people can go in and meet the people who've done up the buildings, talk to them about their experience. And it's also, again, what we're trying to do is work with, rather than setting up our own new systems, we work with existing kind of festivals. So Open House Limerick worked with us on this, but also the Civic Trust. So it's really about becoming this facilitator and allowing other people to work with us on this project. We also had the announcement of our SBIR project. So as Marguerite introduced it earlier, we put out a challenge to come up with new solutions for adapting old buildings for fire safety. So a lot of the solutions that are coming up around fire safety really are focused on the new building techniques. So we haven't had good solutions coming forward. So we put this out, and what has been interesting about this is that the solution, and you can talk to Convex Lens, who are exhibiting outside, really is hooked around this idea of buildings kind of self-certifying themselves. So there's putting in sensors and mechanical and electrical systems in the building for them to certify that they're working, but kind of launching it up into a new area where the occupants of the building and first responders can become part of a digital platform to both pre-predict the conditions for fire, but then also make escape quicker through these kind of early response mechanisms. But also then ramping it up into another area where a neighborhood can have a safety rating by being part of this networked system where your neighbor could come and help people, particularly people who are vulnerable or isolated, out of the building in case of fire. So that's a very interesting area, and what's interesting about it too is that the investment models around that are really around this kind of cooperative working. So this idea that you could get a very direct savings in, say, for instance, your insurance costs because you live in a safe neighborhood through becoming part of a cooperative group is really the business model for this. So contributing your data has a direct impact in your pocketbook. So this is one of the co-design workshops that we held, and this, so you can see that we had a 3D printed model of a block of the city, and we invited our local professionals, also some of our energy champions who are doing up their buildings and looking to become part of the community energy company, working together. One of the key things we learned is plant a kid in every single one of these because they certainly make people think. So people play this sort of board game where they look at different options of how they might move toward a positive energy. They're given 3 options: to work on their own, to work collectively with 1 or 2 of their neighbors, or for the whole block to work together on a single project. They can then begin to see where they reduce their energy, where they save money, and at the end of that session, we have our engineers come in with the science in terms of the actual digital scenario testing model, where they can actually tell us the actual implications in energy savings in terms of some of the propositions that came. So again, that's the game. Just really gets to people to understand the kind of options that they have, and then they meet each other and can hopefully begin to match make and start to plan themselves how they might move forward in terms of moving toward the positive energy scenario. And again, where we would hope this would go is looking at this as a place where new types of energy service companies might be able to form in terms of people working together to put in some of the renewable energy requirements. We also usually involve a creative play project, so this was one where kids were imagining using the same kind of tools to have kids' workshops imagining future Limerick. We had a citizen sensing lab where people were making their own air quality sensors that can then be put into the neighborhood and mapped. And what was interesting about these type of projects is that through these these processes, we begin to meet the people who are already doing stuff there. So in this project, there were 4 or 5 people already working in this area who were kind of drawn to this and are kind of pushing that forward. And then it all culminated in one night in the Citizen Observatory, the Best Bits nights, where all of the information was sort of represented back to the community groups in terms of what we learned that week, and then gets put onto a community dashboard. So it's important to say that we're both using these processes, but also these digital platforms and tools so that they don't just die a death at that one meeting, but can be carried on. And what we hope is that we're creating communities of people who become used to this and begin to use them and build up a collective intelligence about the city through the information that they're contributing. All of that being linked to an open source, open data modeling platform. And this is a description of the open challenge that we have, but this kind of cycle of doing open challenges, some more complex, like the SBIR project. We hope to do another one this year, focusing on specifically on waste and on energy. But then also having these smaller scale, much like the urban beta projects of what we call urban prototypes, where citizens can propose solutions themselves that we will enable to be instituted in our playground, and that they can then be measured. So these are small scale kind of tactical urbanist projects where people can try things out. In this case, this shows an example of one where it was a parklet installed in a public space, but they could equally be an event or Sunday streets or some sort of new way of working. So the idea is that these small pots of money will be made available for these urban prototypes, and they will be given out on a participatory budgeting platform. And the important thing about this, I think, is that the participants feed back information to us that then gets brought up onto a platform where others can see it. I suppose coming back to the reasons why we're doing this are all of 3 of the reasons that are brought up in the Open Government Partnership: transparency, participation, collaboration, and economic development. So just to finish it off, we have a video about the project, if I can manage to get that going.
Today we are very excited because we are launching in Limerick the first European Lighthouse Smart City project called City Exchange. With this project, we are aiming to develop solutions for the creation of positive energy cities. A positive energy city is, in fact, a city that generates more energy than it actually consumes. We are going to start at a block level with 5 buildings and then try to replicate this across additional blocks.
The Georgian neighbourhood, which is where the pilot programme is focused, was built 250 years ago in an intelligent grid system. So we aim to repurpose that logic of the Georgian neighbourhood into a new type of energy system, a community energy grid where collectively people can share and exchange energy between buildings and between buildings and vehicles.
What attracts us to the Positive City Exchange project is that decarbonisation in an urban and a city sector is going to be a real challenge if we're going to meet our climate change goals. So for us, we're going to learn the impact of deploying those technologies and what do we need to be doing to facilitate that.
Today is indicative of what Limerick has been doing for the last number of years. It has been leading out on innovation, it has been disrupting the market. So this is bringing how do you energise and make maximum efficiencies in old buildings. And if we crack it here in Limerick, for Europe and for the globe, I think we're really on a winner, and this is where Limerick is leading out.
This sits nicely with our redevelopment plans for Limerick Post Office, that we would incorporate the energy efficient measures. This will kind of be a benchmark building for us. We will take the learnings we get from this project and transfer it across other offices.
So what we need to do now is build relationships and matchmake people. So for instance, if you're doing up a Georgian building and you want to install solar panels, it's much easier to do that on a terrace together so that you only have one set of scaffolding. But what about our boilers? Can we share boilers? Can we share places to store bikes or bins? Can we share gardens? People want to make their contributions so that we can say to today's children that we stood up and did our bit.
Limerick will see the transformation from the traditional energy model with very large power generators to the new model with many thousands of micro generators of clean energy. And that will lead towards a city that has low or no carbon emissions, a sustainable city, a sustainable community.